Hello everyone. In this video we're going to work with list box controls in ASP.NET. The list controls consist of many different objects, but the ones we're going to work with are the Dropdown List, the Checkbox List, and the Radio Button List. I've already gone ahead in HTML source view for the page and configured these controls. You'll see we have server controls for ASP Dropdown List, and run at server again is what signifies to this page that it's a server control, so it should not be sent to the client. Instead, it's going to render HTML for display on the client. So you can see we can define list items in code. Here I have a list item with a text value of option 1, a value of 1. The text value is what displays to the user when they're working with the web page. The value is what the web page submits to the server. So you can have different items in your value from your text. And then with Checkbox List, you'll see that the structure is very consistent. It's just the web control with nested list items. The same is true for Radio Button List. The only property we set differently on Radio Button List is this repeat direction property. It's used to decide if the radio buttons appear in a left to right order on the page or a top to down order on the page. I've also defined a label control for each of the list controls. This exists simply so that we can write something into the text property of this control at runtime. You can also use literal controls. They're basically the same control, they just display text in the web page. The only difference is the literal control is exactly what you enter in the text on the server side, while the label control wraps the text in a span tag so you could style or apply colors and that sort of thing. But between those two differences, label and literal are approximately the same. So now I'm going to run this web page without any code behind it. And you'll see that it looks roughly like what we had in Studio. So now I'm going to choose to view the HTML source for the page in the client side. So in the source for this page, we can see what happens when we use one of these server controls. The drop-down list has been converted to an HTML select tag with all of the list items converted to options. The checkbox list has been converted to an HTML table where each checkbox is represented as an input control with a type of checkbox. And then the radio button list has been converted to a table as well, but the input IDs, the inputs are defined as radio options. And the way that a radio works, you can only choose one of the buttons out of the list, is it has the same name set for each input type radio. Checkbox, that's not the case. If you look higher in the source, you'll see that the names are different. So now that we know how these controls appear in HTML, we're going to add some code. We're going to make the drop-down list work so that when you choose an item, it resubmits to the server. Right now it doesn't do that. You can't see anything happening in the status bar. So I'm going to close the page, go back to this source view, find the drop-down list, which is right here, and I'm going to add a property. And the property is auto postback. So as you can see, IntelliSense appears to try to guide us through our choices, which is really handy. And then I've set auto postback equals true. I'm going to run the page again. And now I want to choose an item. The page rescreens. Nothing's happening on the page other than that you see the status bar change because we haven't asked anything to happen. So I'll close the page. And now I'm going to go into the source view and I'm going to add an event handler for that drop-down list. I could do it by double-clicking the control, but you can also add an event handler by choosing the control from the left-hand menu list. Here I chose the checkbox by accident. I'll choose the drop-down list control and choose the selected index changed property. This is the same property that appears when you double-click the control, because typically this is the event that most people use when they're working with this control. So the next thing we're going to do is populate a list control from the selection we made when the page reloaded. So the first thing we have to do is find that list control that we are working with. I can find its name by using this drop list because it shows all the controls on the page. So I now remember that I named it label for DDL example. I can also find the control by using the me keyword, which refers to the current page. I can type me dot and then get my drop list, and I can scroll through the list, or I can type the first character of the control. So I'll type the first character, and it's actually LBL4 Dropdown List example. I'll hit Tab, which selects the name, hit the period key again, and it's actually going to the first most likely property I'd want to work with. They're trying very hard on these autocomplete options to make your life simpler. So I just hit the Tab key. I've chosen the text property. I'll use an equal sign to set the value. And now I need to find my drop-down list. Well, it helps that the name of this auto-generated event handler is right here. So I'm going to just put DDL example dot selected item. Now the selected item is that list item we defined before, so it has a text property and a value property. You can access those right here. So I'll hit the dot key again, and I'll just choose text. So again, text is what we actually show the user, values is what we pass back to the server. This code is finished. Now one thing to keep in mind, if you were working in C#, case sensitivity is very important. So like that would not be the same as the control. That would result in an object not found in C#. In VB.NET it's much more forgiving. And case sensitivity doesn't come into play. But now I can run this site, and again I've set an auto postback property to true on the control itself, and I've added an event handler to populate a list control based on what I chose in my list. So I'm choosing something in my list, the list control is populated, and life is good. So that's your basic example of writing to a list box by choosing something from a drop-down list control. Gets a little trickier with a checkbox list. We notice here there's no server-side activity, so there's no auto postback property set. We can do that, but then also we need to realize that the same code that worked on the drop-down list would only get you the value of the very first checkbox. So if you chose 2, it would ignore the second and only go with the first. So we need to solve that in a little bit of program code. So we'll get on the checkbox list right now. Back in the page, I'm going to double-click the ASPX file that takes me into this picture of the source for it. I'm going to find the checkbox list, and I'm going to take care of the easy item first. I'm going to set the auto postback property equals true. Now we need to concern ourselves with how to capture the value of the list items, the ones that are chosen. I can do that on the code side, but first we'll go to Design View, and I'll choose the checkbox list control and double click it. And now what we'll do is we'll see that it automatically created this event.